The gravel crunched under Julius's shoes as he stood on the familiar porch of his childhood home in rural Ohio, 15 years after the night his mother had thrown him out for being gay. When the door swung open and her eyes landed on him and Miles standing side by side, her face went completely pale, her mouth opening but no sound coming out as she stood frozen in shock. "Mom," he said softly, his voice steadier than he felt. "It's me, Julius. I'm home." The years had changed them all. Yet the house looked exactly the same, white siding faded by Midwest winters, the same creaky swing hanging from the porch roof where he once sat dreaming of a life without secrets. Sarah Thompson's hands trembled at her sides, clutching the edge of her apron as if it could anchor her to the ground. Miles squeezed Julius's hand gently, his presence a quiet anchor in the storm of memories that crashed over them both. "We don't have to do this right now," Miles whispered, his blue eyes searching Julius's face for any sign of retreat. But Julius knew they did. The letter from his aunt about his mother's declining health had pulled him back here, and Miles had insisted on coming along, refusing to let him face it alone. Back then, at 18, the argument had exploded like a bomb in their living room after his father found the hidden letters from a boy at school. Julius had finally gathered the courage to tell her the truth after months of hiding who he was, feeling the weight of secrets crushing his chest every night. "I can't live like this anymore," he had said, voice cracking under the fluorescent kitchen light. Her response was immediate and devastating, eyes wide with a mix of horror and betrayal. "If you're going to be like that, you can't be my son. Get out." The words still echoed in his nightmares, sharp as broken glass. That night, with only a backpack stuffed with clothes and a few $100s saved from mowing lawns, he had walked to the bus station in the pouring rain, heading to Chicago with no plan beyond survival. The bus ride had been endless, rain streaking the windows like tears he refused to shed, his mind replaying her face over and over. In the city, the first weeks blurred into a haze of cheap motels and day labor jobs unloading trucks at warehouses on the south side. Loneliness hit harder than hunger. He avoided mirrors because they reminded him of the boy his mother no longer wanted. One evening, shivering in a shelter line, he met an older gay man named Robert who handed him a flyer for a youth support group. "You don't have to do this alone," Robert had said, his voice kind in a way that cracked something open inside Julius. He went, sat in the back row listening to stories that mirrored his own pain, and slowly began to breathe again. Those meetings became his lifeline, teaching him that being gay wasn't a flaw but part of who he was, something to claim instead of hide. By 20, he had scraped together enough for community college classes in graphic design, working nights at a coffee shop where customers sometimes stared too long when he served them with a soft smile. Prejudice followed him there too, a coworker muttering slurs under his breath until the manager stepped in. Each small victory felt like defiance, a step away from the door that had slammed behind him in Ohio. Miles had entered his life 3 years later at that same coffee shop, ordering a latte with a gentle laugh that lit up the room. Their first conversation stretched into hours after closing, talking about dreams and fears without judgment. Miles, a teacher from the suburbs with his own quiet story of coming out to accepting parents, became the first person who made Julius feel seen, not pitted. Their bond grew through late-night walks along Lake Michigan, sharing vulnerabilities that built trust like bricks in a foundation. Julius never forgot his mother, though. Her silence in the years after the expulsion haunted him more than anger ever could. Now, standing here with Miles at his side, the shock on her face mirrored that old pain but twisted it into something new, a question hanging in the air between them. Sarah finally stepped back, her voice barely above a whisper. "Julius." After all this time, the words hung unfinished as she turned away, leaving the door open like an invitation laced with uncertainty. Julius took a breath, Miles beside him, and they stepped inside together, the threshold feeling both like crossing into the past and stepping toward whatever future they might forge. The living room smelled exactly as Julius remembered, a mix of lemon polish and the faint trace of his father's old pipe tobacco. even though Dad had passed 5 years ago without a word reaching him. Sarah moved like a ghost through the space, setting out glasses of iced tea on the coffee table with hands that still shook, avoiding eye contact as if looking at her son might shatter the fragile silence. Miles sat close on the worn couch, his knee brushing Julius's in silent support, the kind of quiet strength that had carried them through so many rough patches over the years. "I didn't know if you'd ever come back," Sarah finally said, her voice cracking on the last word. Eyes fixed on the faded family photos lining the mantel, images of a younger Julius smiling in Little League uniforms before everything changed. Julius felt the old ache rise in his chest, the internal storm he had learned to navigate but never fully escape. In Chicago those first years, every holiday had been a battlefield in his mind, wondering if she regretted her words or if the door remained forever closed. He had thrown himself into his studies, graduating with honors despite working 2 jobs, each late night at the drafting table a quiet rebellion against the rejection that had defined him. Prejudice wasn't just at home. It showed up in the city too. A landlord who suddenly raised the rent after learning about his orientation, or the coworker who stopped inviting him to after-work drinks once rumors spread. Those moments forced choices. Fight back with quiet dignity or let bitterness swallow him whole. He chose the former, volunteering at the support group that had saved him, mentoring younger kids who reminded him of his 18-year-old self, scared and alone. Meeting Miles had been the turning point that shifted everything from survival to living. Their first real date had been a simple picnic in Lincoln Park. Miles packing sandwiches and listening as Julius spilled the story of Ohio for the first time to anyone. "Your mom lost something that day," Miles had said, his hand warm on Julius's shoulder. "But you gained the chance to become who you truly are." That acceptance had healed cracks Julius didn't know existed, teaching him that love between men could be steady and deep, built on shared dreams rather than secrecy. They moved in together after 6 months, a small apartment overlooking the lake where evenings turned into talks about future careers and maybe one day adopting a child. Julius landed a job at a marketing firm, designing campaigns that celebrated diversity, each project a subtle way to rewrite the narrative his mother had tried to erase. Yet the internal conflict never fully faded. Nights when doubts crept in, whispering that he was the reason his family fractured, Miles would hold him until the storm passed. Friendship circles grew too, a tight group of gay men and allies who became chosen family, celebrating birthdays and promotions with laughter that drowned out old echoes. One friend, Alex, had faced similar rejection and offered wisdom during tough times, reminding Julius that forgiveness wasn't weakness but a choice for peace. When the letter arrived about Sarah's health scare, a mild heart episode the aunt described in careful terms, Julius had paced the apartment for hours, weighing the risk of reopening wounds. Miles had been the one to say, "We'll go together. You've grown into someone she needs to meet." Now, sitting across from her, Julius saw the toll of years in her lined face, the way she glanced at Miles with a mix of curiosity and wariness. "He's my partner," Julius said finally, the word feeling both bold and natural after a decade of claiming it. Sarah's hands tightened around her glass, but she didn't interrupt, the shock from the doorway lingering in her silence. The conversation unfolded haltingly, Julius sharing pieces of his life in Chicago, the struggles and triumphs that had shaped him into a man who no longer sought her approval but hoped for understanding. Miles added gentle details, his voice steady as he described their shared apartment and the way Julius lit up when designing. Each word was a step, cautious and deliberate, testing the ground between past betrayal and present possibility. Sarah listened, her eyes occasionally flicking to the door as if expecting the old arguments to return. But the house remained quiet, the weight of unspoken years pressing down like the humid Ohio air outside. As afternoon light filtered through the lace curtains, Sarah began to ask tentative questions, her voice hesitant like someone testing thin ice. "Did you finish school?" she ventured, fingers tracing the rim of her tea glass, the first crack in the wall she had built since that fateful night. Julius nodded, recounting the late nights balancing classes and shifts at the coffee shop, the pride he felt when his first portfolio landed him an internship. Miles chimed in softly, describing how Julius's designs had helped nonprofits tell stories of inclusion, turning pain into purpose. The room felt smaller with each shared memory, the air thick with the kind of tension that comes from years of unsaid things. Julius's mind drifted back to the identity crisis that had nearly broken him in his early 20s, a period when doubts about his worth as a gay man in a world that still judged clashed with the freedom he was building. One winter, after a particularly harsh rejection from a family member of a friend who had cut ties, Julius had stood on the Lake Michigan shore, wind whipping his coat, questioning every choice that led him away from Ohio. "Why couldn't I just pretend?" he had whispered to the waves, the internal battle raging until Miles found him there, pulling him into an embrace that reminded him love wasn't conditional. That moment had been a turning point, solidifying their bond through shared vulnerability rather than perfection. Their relationship deepened over time, marked by decisions like Julius choosing to come out fully at work despite the risk of sidelong glances, Miles standing by him during the fallout when one supervisor made passive comments. They faced it together, Miles's steady teaching job providing balance, their evenings filled with quiet talks about what family could look like beyond blood ties. Friends like Alex became part of that web, hosting gatherings where stories of prejudice and resilience wove them closer, teaching Julius that community could fill gaps left by blood. Yet the pull of Ohio never vanished entirely. Holidays spent with Miles's accepting parents only highlighted the void, making Julius wonder if confrontation was cowardice or wisdom. When news of Sarah's health arrived, it forced the decision: return or forever wander. Miles had sacrificed vacation time at school to join him, a quiet act of support that underscored their partnership. Now, as Sarah absorbed the details, her expression shifted from shock to something softer, though guarded. "You seem happy," she admitted finally, the words carrying the weight of reluctant observation. Julius felt a surge of emotion, the years of growth flashing before him, from the scared teen on the bus to the man who had learned to stand tall. Misunderstandings from the past resurfaced in subtle ways, Sarah mentioning an old church sermon that once shaped her views, prompting Julius to explain how faith and identity could coexist without erasure. Miles listened, offering perspective from his own milder experiences, bridging gaps with patience. The conversation stretched into evening, dinner prepared in awkward silence broken by small talk about the town changes, the neighbor's new fence, anything to avoid the core wound. Julius helped set the table, muscle memory from childhood returning, each plate a small bridge. As they ate, the tension eased slightly, Sarah asking about Miles's teaching life, her curiosity a tentative step toward acceptance. Yet beneath it all, Julius sensed the internal storm in her too, the crisis of reconciling the son she lost with the man before her. That night, in the guest room that used to be his, Julius lay awake beside Miles, the partner's arm draped protectively, whispering affirmations that anchored him. "You've come so far," Miles said, voice low in the dark. "Whatever happens, we're in this together." The words echoed the sacrifices they had made, the choices that defined their journey, and Julius felt the first glimmer of hope that this return might not end in another slammed door. Morning light brought a fragile normalcy, Sarah moving through the kitchen with practiced efficiency, pouring coffee as if the previous day's revelations had settled into a new rhythm. Julius watched her, noting the subtle signs of aging, the slight stoop in her shoulders that spoke of lonely years after his father's passing and his absence. Miles joined them at the table, his easy smile diffusing some of the remaining awkwardness as he shared stories from his classroom. Kids learning about kindness in ways that mirrored their own path. Julius's career successes came up naturally, the promotions at the marketing firm that allowed them to travel, seeing parts of America that broadened his perspective beyond the small-town limits he once knew. Those trips had been turning points, moments when prejudice in unfamiliar cities tested their bond, forcing decisions like confronting a hotel clerk who questioned their shared room or choosing hotels that welcomed all couples. Each challenge strengthened them, teaching resilience and the value of choosing love over fear. Back in Chicago, Their circle of friends had grown into a support network, Alex organizing pride events where Julius marched openly for the first time, the cheers drowning out old echoes of rejection. Yet internal doubts lingered during quiet moments, wondering if his mother's silence all those years meant she had erased him entirely. The health scare letter had been the catalyst, pushing him to weigh the cost of staying away against the possibility of healing. Miles had been instrumental, sacrificing his own family time to drive the long hours from Chicago, their road trip filled with planning conversations about boundaries and expectations. "We don't expect miracles," Miles had said at a rest stop, "but we owe it to ourselves to try." Now, as breakfast progressed, Sarah shared fragments of her side, the regret that had crept in after his father died, the church groups that offered comfort but also reinforced old views. Julius listened without interruption, recognizing her own crisis of conscience, the pressure of community expectations that had shaped her reaction years ago. A misunderstanding arose when she mentioned a cousin's wedding he had missed, prompting Julius to explain how invitations never reached him, the gulf of communication widening the divide. Miles mediated gently, sharing how his own parents had struggled initially before embracing them fully, offering a model of gradual change. The day unfolded with small activities, a walk around the old neighborhood where neighbors stared curiously at the pair, their joined hands a quiet statement. Julius felt the stares like old wounds reopening, but Miles's steady presence turned them into affirmations of growth. Back home, they helped with yard work, physical labor bridging emotional gaps as Sarah watched from the porch, her expression softening with each shared laugh. Evening brought deeper talks, Julius describing the betrayal he felt not just from her words, but from the silence that followed. A decade of unanswered letters he had stopped sending after the third year. Sarah's eyes welled, admitting the shame that kept her from reaching out, the fear of what others would say in their tight-knit town. That admission marked a shift, a sacrifice on her part to acknowledge the harm, while Julius chose to forgive incrementally, recognizing that full healing required time and choices from both sides. Miles's role shone through, his calm logic helping navigate the psychological consequences, reminding them both that love demanded action beyond words. As night fell, Julius stood at his old bedroom window, Miles beside him, reflecting on the journey from expulsion to this tentative reunion. The internal conflict had evolved into clarity. Returning wasn't erasing the past but building on it. Consequences be damned. The following days tested the fragile peace. A phone call from an old high school acquaintance stirring old prejudices when he dropped by unannounced and reacted poorly to seeing Julius and Miles together. Sarah intervened awkwardly, her words defending them haltingly, a small but significant step that revealed her internal battle against years of ingrained views. Julius felt the sting of the encounter like a flashback, the same judgment that had driven him out resurfacing, forcing him to decide whether to retreat or stand firm. Miles supported without pushing, their private conversation that night delving into the societal pressures that still lingered, the way being gay in America meant constant navigation of acceptance levels. Julius recounted a past crisis at work where a client nearly pulled a contract upon learning about his orientation, the choice to fight for the project ultimately strengthening his resolve and earning respect. Their relationship had weathered similar storms, a vacation in New York where public affection drew stares but also inspired a deeper commitment, Miles proposing a simple commitment ceremony with friends that solidified their bond without fanfare. Friends like Alex had played key roles, offering perspective during low moments, once helping Julius through a period of doubt, by reminding him that personal growth came from facing rather than fleeing. Sarah's health improved visibly with their presence, small tasks like grocery runs turning into opportunities for conversation, where she asked about their life in Chicago with genuine curiosity. Misunderstandings flared when she referenced old family traditions, prompting Julius to explain how he had created new ones with Miles, holidays redefined around chosen family. The emotional peaks built gradually, a dinner where Sarah shared her own regrets about not protecting him from his father's anger that night, her voice breaking as she described the guilt that followed. Julius's response was measured, acknowledging the pain without absolving instantly, the psychological weight lifting slightly as they both confronted the consequences of that single decision years ago. Miles facilitated with stories of his students facing similar identity questions, illustrating how education and empathy could bridge divides. A betrayal-like moment came when Sarah's sister called, questioning the visit and stirring old family dynamics, forcing Sarah to choose between loyalty to outdated norms and the son before her. She chose the latter, hanging up with a firm tone that surprised them all, a turning point in her awakening. Julius felt the shift deeply, the sacrifice of her social standing a mirror to his own years of building independence. As the week progressed, walks in the local park turned reflective, Julius sharing how the expulsion had sparked his drive for success. Each achievement a quiet victory. Miles added layers, describing their joint decision to volunteer at youth centers, helping others avoid the isolation he once knew. The climax approached as Sarah suggested attending a local event together, a subtle olive branch that tested boundaries. Julius agreed, the three of them navigating curious glances with quiet dignity, the experience reinforcing that growth demanded ongoing choices. Back home, late-night talks revealed deeper layers, Sarah admitting the fear that had frozen her that first night, now thawing into tentative warmth. The psychological consequences unfolded in waves, Julius processing the validation he never expected, Miles providing steady support that highlighted their partnership's strength. The final evening arrived with a quiet intensity, the house filled with the scent of Sarah's homemade apple pie, a gesture that carried more weight than words. They sat around the table, conversation flowing more naturally now, Julius describing future plans with Miles, perhaps expanding their family through adoption, a dream born from the stability they had built. Sarah listened, her eyes reflecting a mix of wonder and lingering sorrow for lost time. The confrontation reaching its peak when she asked directly about the pain her words had caused. Julius answered honestly, detailing the internal crisis that had nearly consumed him, the choices to rebuild rather than break, and the role Miles played in every turning point. Miles shared his perspective, emphasizing how love between them had taught forgiveness not as erasure but as forward movement. Misunderstandings from the past were laid bare one last time, Sarah acknowledging the prejudice she had allowed to dictate her actions, her voice steady as she expressed pride in the man Julius had become despite her failure. The emotional climax crested in tears shared across the table, a mutual recognition of sacrifices made and consequences faced, awakening dawning as they chose understanding over blame. Friends and family dynamics wove in, Julius calling Alex to share the progress, the support network affirming the journey. As they prepared to leave the next morning, Sarah hugged them both, the embrace awkward yet genuine, her whispered, "Come back soon," carrying the weight of reconciliation. Julius stood on the porch once more, Miles at his side, the door closing softly behind them this time, not slammed. The drive back to Chicago stretched ahead, filled with reflection on the growth from expulsion to this moment. The relationship strengthened through conflict and choice. Their bond felt deeper, forged in the fire of facing the past together. Sarah's transformation, though incomplete, marked a new chapter, proving that even deep-rooted views could shift with time and courage. Julius glanced at Miles, the partner who had been his constant through every high and low, and felt gratitude for the life they had chosen. The years had taught him that identity wasn't a burden but a strength. Family not just blood but bonds built on truth. As the Ohio fields faded in the rearview, the story of their return lingered, a testament to resilience and the human capacity for change. True or false? A parent's initial rejection of their gay child can ever be fully justified by societal pressures, no matter the years of regret that follow?